Today on Perfume Nation, we're diving into the cutting-edge world of AI-powered fragrance design with someone who is at the forefront of it all, Richard Whitcomb, the CTO of Osmo. Osmo is on a mission to bridge the gap between chemistry and olfaction, using advanced machine learning techniques to predict how molecules smell, model entire perfume compositions, and maybe even reshape the way and the future of how we interact with perfumery as we know it. AI is a very hot and debated topic, not only in the perfume industry, but overall in the world. So we will dive into the challenges and dangers of digitizing scent and potential for AI to craft new fragrance innovations or jeopardize perfumers' jobs, whether machine learning can truly capture the end artistry of perfumers, or at best enhance the work of those who spend their lifetime crafting their own neural networks in order to produce groundbreaking, iconic, really imaginative perfumes. Rich, welcome to Perfume Nation.
It's nice to be here today.
Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do at Osmo?
So I'm the CTO here at Osmo. My background is through a different than the normal perfumery background to end up here. So I come from the deep learning AI ML world. So before Osmo, actually, I spent 4 years working on self-driving cars at NVIDIA, focused on the sensors, deep learning, and kind of that portion of it. Back in school, I did chemistry, but I spent a big career between working on Spotify and playlist recommendations to Twitter and recommendation systems, computer vision, and NVIDIA working on self-driving cars and LiDAR and those type of sensors too. And now here at Osmo working on mixture of chemistry, especially captives, which we'll talk a lot about today too, but also GCMS and other analytical equipment we use here day to day. And a little bit of Osmo. Osmo is a company where our long-term vision is to digitize smell, actually in human health, so even beyond the fragrance industry. But our focus right now is on the fragrance industry, and kind of two aspects to that. One side is on the ingredient side. So we are trying to develop new ingredients called captives in the industry and bring those ingredients to market and kind of sell it to other fragrance houses, perfumers, or big consumer companies. The other side of the business too is we are looking at formulation and tools and ability to help create new fragrances together with the mixture of different ingredients, and understanding how to create tools to help perfumers with things like performance and stability, and maybe automation of suggestion of different ingredient replacements if, for example, an ingredient gets banned on the market, which happens fairly often in the fragrance industry. So the building of tools and models and software to help the fragrance industry in general with fragrance creation.
That's a very wide array of modeling approaches. So do you consider yourself kind of a generalist?
Yeah, I consider myself a generalist. Where I focus most on is less on the research side, but really trying to leverage AI and deep learning models and make it useful for people to use day to day. So I really focus on what are the right products to build and how do you have people who are not experts in deep learning ML use these models in day-to-day life. And that's my whole career has kind of been around that subject.
Well, that's great. So maybe you can help us understand the AI currently is a fairly overused term with diluted meaning. People in different communities use it in a very, very diverging sense. But let's say algorithmic development, analytical tools, some form of predictive modeling, it seems that's been around for a long time in the world of fragrance industry, in just the world of smell and sensing in general. When you were transitioning to this field, how did you see the path of evolution of that industry and any kind of modeling that was done there to this day?
Yeah, it's kind of fascinating. And I will separate into two components. There's what I would consider more the perfumery side of it too, which I could talk about. And then there's also specifically the chemistry in the field, it's called chemoformatics background of it. So how do you take chemicals or even chemicals with solvents and other things and predict what they will smell like and how they will perform in say different applications like fine fragrances or candles or like laundry, even for other cases like that too. The cheminformatics community has a long background in it, and that's mostly what I consider like traditional ML stats that you would have seen like in the 1960s, so up to the 80s. So not really leveraging GPUs and kind of what everyone hears about now with AI and those techniques too. And the industry really has been trying to move to more modern forms, but it's been kind of slow. And really, what's lacking for actually for both perfumery and the cheminformatics kind of chemistry side is a lack of data. So if you were interested in this and like maybe you're an independent person who likes deep learning and ML and wants to start working on data, the biggest data sets for perfumery and like smell are in the orders of a few thousand data points, which really limits your ability to actually do much on the ML deep learning side too. So it has a long history of it, but really it's been not hobbled, but hasn't worked as well as you would expect it to, given how long it's been around. And it's really a lack of data, less so than the techniques that kind of that you can kind of bring to those problems.
Curious. I had an interview with a self-taught perfumer, Sam Macer, and he was hinting at a similar problem with just general lack of structured knowledge in learning how to become a perfumer. And he's got an advanced degree in organic chemistry. He specifically studied those components. So why do you think there is such a gap of openly available data and information?
It's mostly trade secrets. So the companies like the big fragrance houses who have most of the data have almost all perfumers work within one of these fragrance houses, a few in the industry too. That data is vital for their business, so they keep it inside private. And what's really tricky, I said I'm not a perfumer, but I understand from perfumery and kind of learned to be a perfumer is it's really hard because you kind of have to access that data and knowing like what ingredients will work and won't work in different application areas. Like even if you're a fine fragrance perfumer, you might try a similar type of formula in terms of a candle, but the problem is it won't perform. Either it doesn't smell great, or even the candle can be dangerous or discolor, and or maybe not stay up on the shelf. So a lot of perfumery, as I understand it, and also what we're trying to help with some of our models, comes down to we have a formula. Does it perform well in, say, a fine fragrance? But how do we make it and change it so it performs well in other cases like laundry detergents or candles or diffusers? And they all have little differences that matter a lot for the performance and stability of the product too. So becoming a performer means you both have to understand possibly thousands of different ingredients and how they perform, from naturals to monomolecular synthetics, to how those materials perform and don't perform in different application areas.
Mm-hmm. Fascinating. Well, if we roll back a little bit to the kind of the origins of predictive modeling. So when you say that these new compounds modeling trying to predict smell, is that akin to, is that all coming kind of from pharma and like drug modeling? Is that the origins of how it got into perfumery?
Yeah, and that's what usually the techniques that we use for a long time we're trying to do. And like I said, the difference in cheminformatics and kind of perfumery is before Osmo, and particularly the group that was part of Google before Osmo became an independent company, worked on was they just didn't work that well. And it was because if you took pharma structure-based predictions, it doesn't work in smell because one thing, if you ever look at ingredients in the perfume industry, there's many ingredients that look nothing alike in terms of the molecular structure that smell either the same. There's also ingredients that look almost exactly the same but smell entirely different. So if you're taking an approach that just looks at information about the structure of the molecule and try to predict smell, they tend to fail pretty badly because of that kind of variation in how the olfactory receptors in the nose work and how we bind to different ways. So there can be vast differences in what things look like and what they smell like. A great example is musk. Musks have 4 different types of characteristics about them, from like macrocyclic to cyclic musks, that matter a lot for the smell, but if you look at them, you would never think that they smell the same because there's really nothing in common in terms of the structure.
Yeah. And it's fascinating that it also works in the opposite direction. What was it, L-carvone that smells like menthol and D-carvone that smells like caraway?
Yep. Yeah. Oh yeah. Isomers matter too. So that's actually the hardest thing, one of the hardest things to do to predict, because purification of stereoisomers is actually very, very expensive. Pharma does it, but like you can't really afford to do it when you're trying to have ingredients that go into like consumer products because there's the expense to it. So different isomers will smell entirely different. Even the structure looks exactly the same. It's just like slight differences in the 3D geometry of the molecule. So that's an example of one of those.
Well, I love this stuff. And just like as a friendly reminder for the listeners, this stereoisomers is molecules, consist of atoms. Atoms prefer to occupy certain space in 3D space, and there are certain rules of engagement, so to speak, when they form bonds. So there are cases where it can be exact same atomic structure. Things are bonded in a very specific way. And yet in 3D, one of them will have a bit of a twist, a slightly different dimensional geometry, and that's called stereoisomers. And even that can lead to a different perception of smell. I feel very indulged now to ask nerdy questions.
Sure, go for it.
Let's dive in. All right. So before all the fancy modeling, and as you mentioned, you can have as fancy of a model architecture as you want. If you don't have good training data, there's not much you can do. But let's assume we do. Let's assume we got an access to and merge three biggest databases of the three biggest chemical manufacturers in the world. So we have all information about we have all the molecules, and let's say it's 10,000, 50,000. And we have any kind of information about them that you can use. Historically, there were a lot of, in this kind of the scientific approaches, how any given molecular structure leads to a certain observable property akin to smell. There were a lot of, I wouldn't say beliefs, but theories that were really hard to test, such as, for the longest time, shape theory. So there is a certain molecular shape, and the receptor and the molecule, they have to fit each other, and there's nothing crazy about this theory. And yet there were also cases, just like you said, there could be similar shape, and yet a different kind of behavior with the scent. Also, the OG of fragrance blogging, Luca Turin, who is also a scientist, he really favored a vibrational theory, that certain distribution of electronic density and the vibrations of atoms in their places, that's what leads to a very specific behavior when it comes to propagation of signal and the odor perception. So there are so many features you can consider besides just where the atoms are, where they're in 3D, what's the electron density, what else can we have? Just specific kind of known phenomenological properties of functional groups. Which features are the most useful?
Yeah, it's a good question, and there's a lot to them too. One of the approaches that kind of like was the foundational genesis of Osmo was kind of, so there's two approaches to this problem. What happened historically and what we did here, the team that kind of built Osmo and that we do here at Osmo, is historically you would kind of do what in the ML community is called feature engineering. So you would try to sit down and think about which features. Is it something with like the bond lengths or kind of 3D geometry or the energy? You can also do things like functional groups. You can count functional groups. You could count number of sulfurs, nitrogens, lots of things you could add as features. There's actually a whole libraries that just kind of give you many, many features that kind of like built in a box, which is called fingerprints in the community. Those tend to work okay. The thing that we did here at Osmo that was a bit different is instead of like looking at like all the biology between it, because if you think about when you smell something, there's a few things that have to happen. The molecule, let's say if it's in a fine fragrance, let's say it's on your skin. First of all, it has to get into the air. So it has to be volatile enough to get off your skin into the air. It also has to be able to float into your nose to get there. It has to like get through the nose, get into the receptor, then it has to bind to the receptor, and the receptor has to fire a neuron that then connects to your brain that you then smell that sample. So there's lots of chemistry and kind of physical components to that too. What we did here at Osmo, which was unique, was instead of trying to model the different aspects of like receptor binding and cell diffusion in the air and also vapor pressure, is you just instead just ask people, what does this smell like? And then if you ask enough people, okay, what does this smell like and what's the intensity of this, you then can model directly from the structure to those odor predictors. And then what happens is you can use types of models where, in this case, graph neural networks, where you no longer have to like think about the features that matter. In the case of the fingerprints I mentioned earlier, the model in the ML community is called a black box, figures out which features are important of it. But that being said, there is some ways to inspect what's going on there too. And the thing when you do is when you inspect what that deep learning model is learning is it has a lot to do with shape and functional groups. Like there's certain functional groups and parts of the molecule that don't matter at all for odor, and other ones that do matter a lot. But it kind of depends a bit on the shape of it. This is still an area of active research, but some of the first forays into that shows that there seems to be patterns about the molecule that matter and other ones that don't. And it's not always clear when it matters and doesn't matter yet in the community.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned graph neural networks, and I want to get back to the architecture question. But first, as we're trying to discuss like what's important, what's not, kind of a philosophical question. You can, like looking down, and there is training data, there is, your testing protocols, there's your architecture, and there are your features. In some ways, when we were limited by compute power or certain architectures or the amount of data that we had, feature design was very vibrant subfield of modeling. And if you look at it kind of in a primitive and a practical sense, in a way, it's almost like an intel derived from training data. Like if you had a perfectly smart model architecture, then you can just throw whatever you have and you don't have to design smart features. So are these new modeling architectures, the neural nets of different kinds, making us just like monkeys with magic boxes, that we're becoming lazy modelers? I was like, yeah, just throw it in, it will figure it out.
Yeah, in a sense, that's the big, if you go back a little bit in the difference between what I would call traditional machine learning and deep learning, which is now kind of the thing that's been turned into AI, especially generative AI, that's the difference, right? It's sort of like you no longer, as a researcher, when I started my career in computer vision, I had to spend a lot of time thinking about features and what's the features and what's the most important part of the image that I should store so I could pass it through a model to predict, dog or cat or whatever it is. Same thing too in chemistry. You have to think about, okay, are we encoding every type of atomic, even up to like quantum mechanics type feature that could be helpful, and then give it to somebody have a model to learn on top of that. So yes, in some cases we are losing our ability to do these feature engineering too. The thing though is what I found kind of building these models over my career is you still kind of have to understand the features and what's important to go back, because what happens a lot is you spend a lot of your time then going back and cleaning and fixing and making the data sets better, because it all comes down to data sets and if they're clean or dirty. Because like if you give it a bad data set, the model won't learn anything, but it also won't tell you why it didn't learn anything. So you have to kind of find ways to inspect what's going on inside these as much as possible, so you can go back and either change the architecture of the model or go back and clean or find a bit of data set in some cases.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, like there is probably a grief circle somewhere for machine learning engineers where there's a weekly discussion that errors in training data don't average out like everyone expects them to.
Yep.
Throwing more data at it does not mean it will just learn the right thing. Got it. Okay, so then if that's what really gave us the breakthrough in understanding the world, including the world of smell and odor perception, it's the smart, sophisticated, large architectures. So then I'm curious, what's your take on all of those neural nets? Their name also suggests are kind of derivative of the neuroscience research on how our brain works. In some sense, they're more primitive. In some sense, they're actually their own thing now. They have their own features that don't correlate with how brain does things. So it's kind of becoming its own form of neural dynamism and structure. Why do you think differing architectures are winning in differing application tasks? To name a few, diffusion, aka noise removal architectures for audio synthesis, transformers for text or lingual synthesis, and graphic neural networks for anything that has a topology? Well, I guess I'm putting a little bit of an answer there, but for chemical modeling, why graphic neural networks?
Yeah, it's a good question. It comes down to it's a few different cases. It's what the community has found that has worked best for those different problem areas. It also comes down to a lot of what models could withstand the most amount of data and still kind of like store and encode that data in terms of the weights inside the models too. So we found that, for example, diffusion models work pretty well because they are pretty stable over large amounts of data, while other models, like for example, GANs was a competitor to it in the early days, didn't work as well because they were very hard and finicky to train. So sometimes it's ease of train too. GNNs are interesting because there is actually an open kind of discussion in the community around chemical modeling that some people are moving to transformer-based models, so similar to LLMs that you would see in text. And other people are sticking with GNNs. So there's an interesting point where the community is trying to figure out like how much to use those models for chemistry modeling versus how much to use GNNs. What I've found personally, and I think is interesting, is GNNs I think also tend to work better with less data than some of these other models. So a lot of times, like I mentioned earlier, in chemistry, especially smell and fragrances, you're very limited about the number of data. All of the molecules that are available in a kind of normal sized palette for perfumers to work with, if you talk about monomolecular, you're talking about like a few thousand. So very small models are actually materials are available in the fragrance community. So if you model just those, that's still a small data set in terms of machine learning. So researchers also found that graph neural networks tend to learn pretty well on the small data, while a transformer, and especially a diffusion model, needs a lot more data to kind of do something. So part of the answer is they work in the application areas where they're focused on, but given more data, other techniques actually might work better. And even more data, you actually might have to stop using a certain technique and switch again because of some limitation about the architecture.
Mm-hmm. How differing are they really, though? I wonder because in a lot of machine learning, everything eventually is some kind of matrix operation. So even the most sophisticated topology can be represented as layers of, tables essentially, where you have, 0, 1 bond or property, connectivity type is present, not present. Also, the more you dive into these architectures, the more you realize they're not as simple as they seem. Even GNNs can have, in the message passing, can have sort of components that can be models in themselves.
Yep. Yeah, it's actually a good question. There's a paper out there that actually says that, in a sense, transformers are a type of GNN. So, like, in a sense, graph neural networks are kind of like this, like, larger architecture. And if you talk about, like, you mentioned message passing, how you do that and how you pass messages. If you do it in a certain way, it actually is the same as a transformer. So there is equivalency between these models. It gets a little bit more on the theoretical side, but that is true. And researchers have found that like some of these models that you think are entirely different are different views of kind of the same problem in the same way that they're making use of the data.
Can you explain to us, kind of in layman terms and like in a pedestrian language, what does graph neural net do?
Yeah, so if you think about a molecule, another way to think about it is it's just a graph. So there are atoms, and then there are bonds between atoms. Atoms have different types. So if you think about a molecule as in the case of smell, it's a very, very small graph. In the case of proteins, it's a very big graph. But here, we're talking about smell, so very little molecules, because molecules have to be small to be volatile to get into the air. And they're actually the smallest. Like drug discovery talks about small molecules, these are smaller than drug discovery molecules by a lot. So very little molecules that we talk about in the fragrance industry.
That is a very important point. I just want to emphasize, because a lot of people forget that for aroma chemicals and the magic of perfumery, these molecules have to be very self-sufficient living in the air. So all these magic of smells and sometimes very strong emotions that come with them comes from these teeny tiny little things, and they have to be teeny tiny in order to be everywhere and get anywhere,
Yep.
including the nose.
Yeah,
It's crazy how small they are.
yeah. And usually, especially chemists coming from the other side of the world, so drug discovery, are very surprised of how small they have to work with these molecules. Um, that actually does help us because then it makes it a bit easier of a problem to model. But if you go back to GNNs, what they have to do is, so one method of doing this is if you look at the molecule as a graph and the atoms and the bonds, what you can do is for every atom, you can essentially store information about that atom. And then using kind of like techniques of ML, which is called message passing, is you pass messages between all the different atoms along the bonds in the graph, or kind of the edges of the graph. Then each of those will combine and do some matrix, usually multiplication, and some in activation layers to kind of put those together. They will then do some things like sum those to just kind of make them the same size, and then keep passing. So the goal is to take information for each atom, pass it around to all your neighbors along the bonds, take that information together in some way, then pass it around again, and keep doing this pass until finally you accumulate all the information, and then you have some kind of think about it as like a point in space or some representation of everything about that atom, and then from that molecule, and then from there you predict something that you care about, like let's say, is it cherry, is it not cherry, for example, as a goal. Then the whole point deep learning and ML in general is you then can tell the model that it was correct or not correct with its guess of like cherry, not cherry, for example. And then that information can be updated with like what's called weights, different ways to look at the information. And then over time, you keep doing this where you keep updating the weights, and the information gets to a point where it's optimal for guessing cherry, not cherry, and ignores things that doesn't matter for that prediction.
So if is it fair to call those embeddings
Yes.
in the GNN world? Okay. So we have all the human readable information. So we create these massive storage tables, and we keep passing the information from neighbor to neighbor till I presume the matrix, this kind of storage table of information that now is not human readable, is stable, right? So there's no more things to be changed or passed from neighbor to neighbor. And we call that a stable but not human readable representation and embedding of everything that this molecule is about. We take this table and we pair it with some kind of quality that associated with this entity, with this thing. Okay, and then we start training. All right, what's in this huge table connects us to this cherry, not cherry, plum, I don't know, smoky, salty, stinky, or whatever. How would you deal with subjectivity of odor perception then? Because I imagine just myself as a fragrance reviewer, it drives me to tears because the most popular questions: what is the scent that everybody will love? Complimentary, sexy. How to smell expensive, which is a cultural construction. And even if you go down to things that everybody should be able to understand, but it's very subjective, how to smell clean.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a good question.
Clean, right? Like cleaning product. People use clean for what is it? Like they're cleaning products that have Nutrimusks. They're cleaning products that have cinnamon in different parts of the world. So to somebody, the smell of cinnamon reminds them of baking, and to somebody else, that's clean.
Yep. So we think about this a lot, and again, my background's on neuroscience, but we do have neuroscience on the team here at Osmo. And so there's a field of neuroscience called olfaction neuroscience. We focus on that. And what that community has found over time is you can actually separate out the objectivity of smell and the subjectivity of too, or hedonics, which is called in the community. And when it comes down to, and what they found over many, many studies is, if you sit down people and you train them to say, okay, this is the smell of cherry, or this is the smell of woody, this is the smell of amber, or this is the smell of gourmand, they will learn that, okay, I know the smell of gourmand, and they can tell you what molecules smell like gourmand, or like samples or perfumes as you give it to them. So you can train people to do this, and across the world, outside of like particular people anosmias who don't have certain smells, like some people can't smell muss. But outside of certain anosmias, you can train people and they will be objective. And it doesn't matter if you're in India, China, the Middle East, the US, they are fairly good at doing this with enough training. The difference, though, is what people like is totally different. So certain cultures, as you mentioned, might like cinnamon and think it's clean. They might think it's spicy and like Christmas. So Christmas versus clean, depending on the culture. So there's huge cultural differences. So what we try to do here at Osmo, and think about the ingredients, is the separation between what does this smell like and do people like this. And if you could put those things together, then you have interesting things, because you could like make perfumes that smell like something, but also target maybe a certain demographic or a certain region of the world, or that side too. So we, as much as possible, try to separate the two, but then combine them back together where it matters in terms of us building products.
Mm-hmm. Fascinating. So good news is that we can agree on definitions if we work at it. Bad news is we still have preferences and tastes. Mm-hmm. Well, when it comes to going from molecule modeling to a perfume, which is a mixture, even if we assume we all, like the whole world came together, we all went through the same nose training, and we finally agreed on at least some vocabulary and definitions. Let's assume that, or let's assume we have a panel of perfume evaluators who are properly trained according to the same protocol. But then a dilution of one molecule can spend one way, and you add a second, even just two molecules, and then there are all kinds of nonlinear effects of how they smell together. So modeling from one molecule to order, mixture to order. How easy, hard is it?
It is challenging, and it's one of the areas we have focused research on right now. In some cases, it has been found that they do, in a sense, mix in a kind of an easy way, where it's like, okay, if you add a bit of woody and a bit of citrus, it will smell woody and citrus, up to a point. But there are effects, and we don't know which of these effects is the most important, especially kind of more from like the biology side of, for example, there are known effects where you can actually smell something and then you can't smell the other thing. So like, and then there's also cases where you might, you can actually smell something and it can make another smell stronger or weaker. Not by blocking, so it's kind of like antagonism going on in the proteins. So there's complex biology. One of the core questions we have here at Osmo, and I don't think it's been answered in the kind of research community at all, is how much of those kind of effects are in the chemistry. So things happen in the bottle with like kind of the solvent ethanol in the case of fine fragrances, or something else for candles, or how much of that effect is fully in the nose. So is it a biology thing? So if you know the biology, you could figure out what every mixture would smell like without actually kind of doing any of the real world samples? Or is it a matter of when you put two things together, there's some effect in the bottle that happens? Here at Osmo, I think more of it is in the biology side, so in the nose, and there's less happening in the bottle, mostly because these ingredients are used in very small amounts in samples, so there's less ability for them to interact. Outside of the case, of course, where you put them into like a bleach, then what's called the base in the industry for the application area will affect the smell dramatically.
Got it. Yeah, I mean, the observer effects are everywhere.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Interesting. Well, one of the things that I'm curious about is these kind of silent enhancers of smell perception. First of all, there are, as we now know, there are silent molecules that we don't have experience of smelling anything, and yet they activate the olfactory bulb. The whole thing is working. The olfaction system is working. We're getting all kinds of effects, but to us, that molecule is silent by itself. We don't smell anything. They can act by themselves. They can enhance or suppress the odors of other molecules in the mixture. And just to give another example, since I don't cook, everything I learn about cooking blows my mind. When my mom was showing me how to make a good oatmeal, like old school, she added so much salt and sugar. I was shocked. As somebody who is athletic and I aim to eat well, it's like, why? And then I taste, and don't taste salt. I don't taste sweet. They balance each other out for the taste receptors, but it's tastier.
Yeah.
It's not salty, it's not sweet when it's balanced, but the whole thing feels tastier because your taste buds are very, very much activated. So I presume in perfumes, and again, 70, if not 80% of tasting is smelling, it's probably the same. Some molecules might even suppress each other, yet still make the whole experience more vivacious.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a good question. It's an open area of research. One side of it, too, is the industry has these kind of mysterious molecules that I think part of you're referring to is there's two sides to it, but the mysterious ones that it's a big focus of the industry is fixatives and blooming agents, is what they call them. So, difference is a fixative is you add something to it that maybe has no odor or maybe a slight odor to it, or maybe sometimes a big odor. I think Lily might be a famous example of this that makes something last longer. So there's things known in the perfume ingredient that if you add this, the entire perfume lasts longer. You also have the opposite. There's blooming agents. What that means is if you add this to a fragrance, it will make things come out faster. You actually see this more in applications like shower gels, because what you want to happen is you want, when it's touched with water, to come out very strong in the shower. You don't really want that to come out 3 hours later. You want it to be smelling it in the shower. So there are also ingredients known that if you add this, they essentially bloom better, so it comes out faster. Or for hand soaps, if you're washing your hands, you kind of want that to bloom faster. You want that smell to come at you almost immediately. And the thinking right there is actually that's more on the chemical side. There's something happening where those ingredients might be adjusting vapor pressure, so it's easier for other ingredients to get into the air or harder to get into the air in the case of fixatives. But I think what you're saying is also true where there are effects in the nose where adding an ingredient, for example, you can think about it is if you add a big ingredient, you might block the receptor. But what happens in biology a lot is even though if you bind to the receptor, it doesn't actually fire the neurons, so you don't smell it. But if you block the receptor, another molecule that binds that same receptor might not be able to get in there, or maybe not as strongly. So in a sense, by adding an ingredient, you sort of have blocked the sensor. It's actually a very active area of research, less in fragrances, but more in kind of like odor removal. So like the hope is someone can find something where you can like a Febreze thing, but Febreze doesn't work in this mechanism. But like you can find something that you can spray that essentially makes it impossible for you to smell the other odor because your receptor is already smelling something it can't smell, if that makes sense.
Could this in any way explain sort of a blooming field of fragrance layering? Because there are millions of testimonies of people who like a certain aspect of a perfume or fragrance that they buy, but they don't like some other aspect. And they keep searching for a complementary additive in other perfume in their collection and just empirically find something. It's like, oh, I no longer feel this sourness or this bitterness in it, by layering more on top of more.
Yep. It's a good question. We don't know exactly why that's happening, but it could be either this effect, talking about the blooming or the fixative effect, or it could be something else with the nose where inside your nose you can't smell maybe as strongly that second ingredient too. And it's open area. It's probably a little bit of both that's going on there.
Right. So we mentioned specific molecules that have these sort of magical properties, whether silent or not. I'm kind of curious to get your hot takes on a few aromatic molecules, those scandalous celebrities in the world of fragrance. For example, ESO Super. Is that a silent queen or a naked king?
Yeah. ISO Super is a famous one. It's also, as you listeners probably know too, there are actually fragrances out there that 100% ISO Super, or ISO Gamma, in case we have debates about that one. That one is kind of interesting because it's a very complex smell. Actually, if you go back to...
if you can smell it, because some people can't.
Oh yeah, we actually have a few people here at Osmo who can't smell it at all. So essentially they have a fragrance they can't smell. It's just basically water or ethanol to them. ISO Super, actually, if you talk about that one a bit, if you go back to what we were talking earlier about stereoisomers, it's actually a very complex molecule and has lots of mixtures. So why it has that kind of complex note and why it could kind of work in lots of cases and actually almost could be a fragrance by itself is that it has a lot of different of those isomers, those stereoisomers in it. So even though it's one molecule, you have different ratios of those, and it actually gives it a much more complex smell. So it's a very interesting molecule. It's also a very weak molecule. At the end of the day, you have to add a lot of it to a fragrance. So that's really good if you're selling Ice Super, although it's out of patent right now. But it's also very bad because you don't want lots and lots of a chemical on you or in your clothes, because it could lead to like skin irritation and especially allergens down the road too, which usually when things are used in large amounts, they tend to have problems later on.
Okay, all right. Going to the opposite, Amberxan. Is that a magnificent beast or a weapon of nose destruction?
Yeah, that's a strong sell. You talk about personality. I actually don't like amber smells that much. So,
We're talking about ambergris. So this is
amber scent.
Amberxan is the one that's very prominent in Baccarat Rouge and a lot of these kind of beast mode perfumes.
Okay.
Like when you start looking back at things that are being recommended as beast mode, indestructive, pretty much you can survive biohazard cleaning crew. A lot of them contain Amberxan.
Yeah. Yeah. Actually, I don't know the ingredient that well to kind of talk about it that side.
Okay, well, if we generalize out of it, there are certain, well, for example, dihydromercenol, which is in probably 90% of perfumes marketed toward men,
Yeah.
to some smells like an anthem to true masculinity, to others as a windshield wiper liquid, this like chemical, very piercing smell. So there are other molecules like that, are like
Yeah.
so-called beast mode.
Yeah.
What is your viewpoint like on are they even safe in large quantities? Because they are indestructible.
Yeah. Well, there's two sides to it too, right? There's like the way we think about this, there are molecules that and compounds that are maybe not used in large amounts, but like in a sense last forever. So one of the things we work here a lot at Osmo is there's this kind of balance between you want long lastingness, but you don't want it to last too long. If you go outside, kind of find fragrances, Glaxolid is a great example of a molecule that lasts a really, really, really long time. It's almost indestructible in all fragrance applications. Maybe not all, but most fragrance applications. What people are trying to find, though, is it doesn't biodegrade that well. So there's papers now it's accumulated in places too. So you have this like trade-off between you can have something that's very long lasting, but also something that because it lasts so long, it's probably harder for things in the environment to break it down. So there's sometimes this tricky balance between things that are long lasting and things that are biodegradable. So the holy grail really for us is kind of talking about like strength too, is like what you want is a molecule that's very intense smelling. So you need very little from it. So that keeps it safer for humans from like an allergen perspective, but also make sure that it lasts long, but it's safe for the environment. So how do you find the balance between safe for the environment, safe for people, but is also very intense and lasts long, especially if you're looking for a base note or a middle note.
Can we model, are there any modeling approaches to model longevity and safety, like this toxicity modeling?
Yeah, so we do all of these. So we have models internally that do, I guess the first important one, of course, when we kind of bring molecules in-house is it safe to inhale, of course. But the really big ones that tend to get ingredients removed from the market, Lilial's example of this is like toxicity around humans. So either it's like a genotox, which is the worst, so it's like genetic toxicity. So we have models on those, but we also have predictors and models on, is it a skin sensitizer? So does it like create allergens in your body when you put it in your skin? And also skin irritability. So does it turn your skin red when you put it on? Certain parts of the population have irritability and other ones, skin sensitization tends to be a bigger problem for certain segments of the population or certain regions of the world where certain ingredients might be an allergen to some people, but not other people. And also what people have found is as ingredients are used more and more, people tend in the population build up allergy to those ingredients because they're overused in different application areas too. So there's a big mixture of, for us, how do we model those and how we find things that are safe for humans. And we also have models internally that predict biodegradability. So is this molecule safe for the environment? And can we predict that it will be safe once we start to produce it? And another model we have too, which is not quite safety in terms of humans or the environment, is we also can predict the intensity of a molecule. So even before we see a molecule and bring it into our lab, we can actually predict how intense it would smell. So in a way, having something like an ICE super, which has to be used, it's usually used at 60%, like 40 to 60 is kind of normal. You want to, if you can find something that can replace an IC super at like 0.5% or like less, you have found something that just because its nature is it's used way less, it's actually safer for people and the environment, with included the other things we're looking for in terms of safety.
Interesting. I have one more molecule, well, actually two more molecules for you. In each of them, it's kind of like has its own world of implications. Helion, beside being very widely used, it also was originally overused, arguably overused, because it was predicted to enhance the action of pheromone-based fragrances. Where are you on the pheromone stuff?
Yeah, I'm kind of with. I think a lot of the community you see is they don't exist in humans. I know that's a controversial point, but like,
well, scientifically speaking, it's just a historical fact, right? Like the pheromone as a thing, as a term, was invented from the insect and bacterial research.
Oh, yes, yeah.
Right? And by definition, it's an agent, a chemical agent that a small organism consumes that induces unconditional response related to mating behavior.
Yes.
Of this, of that kind, right? So it should be unconditional. And it seems that very few things are unconditional when it comes to smell.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I agree with that too. Pheromones clearly exist kind of outside humans. I think a lot of the scientific community is unsure about is, have you found one yet that works in humans? So did we evolve away from them, or if there's one out there that we have found? There's actually a case of I might forget the molecule right now. There's a case though of someone finding a pheromone that actually is on newborns that makes men less aggressive and women more. Yep, exactly. So that's the one case I've seen where there was actually a paper published that said that they found an effect of a molecule on some human behavior too. So in that case, there is one that's in a scientific paper. Yeah, I think for me, the jury's still out and kind of seeing what papers and what the scientific community finds around those. But I have heard the same thing about Helion too.
All right, so that's that about pheromone perfumes. Fiscal. I recently did a review of a new flanker by Hermes, and this is the first, at least according to the largest database of fragrances, Fragrantica, the first perfume where a brand explicitly not only discloses a captive, but uses it as a core point of marketing. So they're using a captive called Fiscal that by itself doesn't have an odor, but is known to make any composition smell fresher without necessarily introducing mint flavor, or bergamot flavor, or lavender flavor, or anything else that we associate with this kind of soothing freshness. When I looked into Fiscal, it was quite a scandalous molecule. First of all, it was introduced in 2024, just like yesterday, as a groundbreaking innovation. They made a whole marketing campaign around it. This is the first fragrance that contains it in the middle of the pyramid. They're not masking it with any kind of marketing terms. It's minty or fresh, ocean breeze, nothing like that. Fiscal, here we go. Smell the molecule even though it doesn't have a smell. But then you look at it and it's a captive that was discovered over 20 years ago. And then varying manufacturers stole it from each other and sued each other with massive lawsuits and royalties. So to me, it all like brings this question of maybe you don't have an opinion on Fiscal specifically, but captives, new, novel, potentially purely synthetic molecules. Is it the future of modeling of odors? Like, where are you on this?
So it's two sides. A large part of business here at Osmo is coming up with new captives and kind of selling those and kind of bringing those to fragrances and kind of like making available to perfumers too. And I see two sides to this. One side is because of what I was talking about earlier with like toxicity and other predictions is A lot of the ingredients that we use now in the fragrance industry and perfumers use in their day-to-day work likely won't be available to them in 10 years. So we do, as an industry, have to find new replacements for those. And we know, for example, the glass slide example, it likely won't, because of biodegradability concerns, we probably likely have to find a new clean musk replacement for laundry, for example, in that case. So part of it is kind of thinking ahead of like, okay, in 5-10 years, what will be missing? So in that case, you do kind of have to find new captives that can replace different molecules. Lilial was banned 2020, I believe, and there's been a lot of work to try to find replacements for that, or different kind of bases or mixtures that can replace that. So that's one side. The other side too, which we hear a lot about, is we know that there are certain odors that people just can't get to. So I think captives are the way to kind of get there and allow more creativity in perfumery. So a lot of people ask for like a new leather smell. Also, you see a lot asking for like some holy grails we heard about is a new buttery smell. So butter is very hard without the sour note, and also safety for actually people making the molecule was a concern there. So can you find a new butter molecule? Can you find a new citrus that could be a base note is another big thing in the industry. Citrus is all top note, almost all top note. So if you can find citrus that is a really good base note that lasts for a few hours, that would be a huge change to perfumery in general. So we hear a lot about people, kind of both sides, asking for a replacement, but also like we struggle with this whole area of perfumery because there's missing ingredients here too. So can you find us an ingredient that can help with those type of odor profiles?
Can you illuminate a little bit about more creativity in the perfume industry? Because it's not obvious to me from the get-go that existing of captives is in any way good for creativity.
Yeah, in one respect, if you could kind of find a new note, you might open up new creativity, but really it's up to the perfumers, artist to make use of the ingredient in a way that hasn't been seen before too. So the hope there is like if you could kind of give a painter a new color, they do something interesting with the new color. Not being a painter, I wouldn't maybe foresee what will come out of that, but we have seen in the past that new ingredients actually do open up some new creative fields, like Ice Super kind of stormed on the scene, as you mentioned earlier, a few decades ago too. So it's really given new colors to the palette of the painters, in the case the perfumers that kind of work with those. But it's a question too of like, people also follow trends and what's trendy and what's popular right now too. So who are the ones who kind of take the risk to go outside of those fields and kind of do the new kind of different thing, especially with a new ingredient. Possibly a new ingredient mixed with a new with a natural that kind of does something different, that kind of opens up a new area of perfumery for people to explore.
Mm-hmm. I wonder about this kind of angle of intellectual property, because as far as I know, you cannot prevent another perfume maker from having the same mixture of molecules. But apparently, you can prohibit the whole world of producing and using a specific chemical molecule that you, let's say, first discovered, if you can prove that. So I wonder if this existence of captives, privatized molecules that you need to license to use, is the way to pretty much control where the money goes.
Yep. You see this a lot, especially in the big fragrance houses, is they have their own captives programs. So they will work with some of their clients, like some of the big, for example, CPG companies. So outside of fine fragrances, talking about like laundry and shampoos and soaps. So a lot of times they will put captives into those because it's kind of a two-sided relationship. Like the big companies know from the consumer side that their scent is protected, so no one can copy their scent. It also helps the fragrance houses because you can't move to a different fragrance house or a different perfumer because they won't have access to the same materials on it. So this IP matters a lot because everyone in the industry knows that there is no protection against copying of it. And you do see a lot of copying within the industry because of that. But if you do have a few ingredients that are, like especially captives, that are very important for the odor profile, or maybe just the performance characteristics, so you might be able to put a note into a liquid detergent for a laundry application that doesn't exist with any other ingredient on the market. There is protection for both sides around that.
I wonder if that also kind of another factor that explains the why dupes usually fail to deliver, even though it's by itself a fascinating phenomenon that the dupe industry is finally out of the shadows. You know, there are companies who proudly make dupes of famous perfumes, but often there's much discussion over the internet. Probably half of YouTube exists on the dupe comparison videos, and it's always that something that's usually missing in the dupe. One argument that I heard from Sam Macer, who is a perfumer, that the dupe companies, by definition, are trying to make a cheaper product.
Yes.
So even if they have access to headspace technology and they can precisely map every molecule in the original, it's just the costs have to be lower. So they will try to mimic it without using that very recipe. And you're saying, and some molecules, if they are important for the composition, for the odor, and they're captives, so that you need to license them, then you just can't.
Yep. And it's a bit of both too. So if you're trying to duplicate it, you also likely don't have access to the farmers and for the actual natural oils too. So it might be very, very hard for you to get like the right Bulgarian rose oil. It's both very, very, very expensive. So like you may not want to put it in there in the first place, but also you can't easily just go and purchase a high quality kind of natural like that. So the quality of the ingredients also matter a lot to make sure you have like access to the right farmers and different pairs to kind of replicate those ingredients. So you might know it's a rose oil, but not get the right one, and that will kind of throw off the odor a bit too. And at the same time, so you have that effect where you don't have access to the same natural ingredients, while also you might have a few captives in there where you don't have access to the ingredient at all. You can't get anything quite like it. So both those things together will tend to make it harder for these companies to duplicate fragrance on the market.
You bring a very important distinction between sort of natural and synthetics, and there's endless debates that probably always exist about what's better or safer or more aesthetically pleasing or more conceptually interesting, and people really differ in their assessment of all of these aspects of naturals versus synthetics. That said, I think a lot of people don't realize that there are certain synthetic routes of producing a molecule that is found in natural headspace of whatever, let's say, rose that you flavor that you're trying to reproduce. And apparently, correct me if I'm wrong, you can also patent the way of producing. So I think, if I understand correctly, the history of Symrise, that would really boosted their stock when they patented a very efficient way of making menthol, and pretty much they're menthol kings of the world.
Yeah.
So where are you on synthetics versus naturals, and how do you guys use that in your modeling of odors?
So we handle those, and it's a very important part to get a fragrance right is the natural components too. So there's a kind of a few sides to your question. I'll try to answer them. There's also a distinction, something we think of a lot too, is there are things that you would think about as like, not necessarily synthetic, but a monomolecular. So like you said, like linalool is present in lots of naturals. So you can get linalool as a material that is both naturally derived, so it's extracted from a natural. You can also get linalool as purely synthetic, means made in a lab by chemists. So even the same ingredients you'll see in fragrance houses, you have both options to them, and usually the naturally derived one is more expensive. What matters a lot though, and especially when you talk about Symrise and kind of patenting the synthetic route, is when you make ingredients, the route will kind of leave some different impurities into it, and actually that matters for the quality of the ingredient. So the other things left over can actually either enhance or detract from that route. So you'll see lots of different ingredients. So a lot of times in a selection of materials for perfumery to use, you'll see essentially where you think about the same molecule like 5 or 6 times, because it's different suppliers, different kind of routes, or it may be different naturally versus synthetically made. And those all kind of, in minor ways, but sometimes bigger ways, actually impact on the odor. So if you can protect either as a trade secret or a patent your synthetic route, you might be the only person that is able to make that specific ingredient well. Because other people can try to make it, but they might not find that way to make it, and it might smell sometimes entirely different on that too. So there is ways to protect things on that side. So that's kind of on the route side. For naturals too, what we believe here at Osmo is like we actually in many cases want to see more naturals in fragrances. So the hope is, and we were trying to do this with Uncapta, is if you can kind of make things very intense, also help with the odor, it also might make it so like you can use less of these and open up more of the available cost in perfumes to include more natural ingredients too. They could add more of those like fuller kind of notes to a fragrance also, where many, even five fragrances now tend to be very heavy on the kind of synthetics, monomolecular, non-natural ingredients.
Not only that, but people often forget that most of the cult perfumes of their decades in the past were very tightly linked with either invention or novel usage of a
Yes.
synthetic aroma molecule. Like all of them, Chanel number 5, like nearly all of the cult ones became cult ones not because they were based on naturals, because the natural essences, even though we refine the processes, the citrus essential oils existed all the way back to medieval times. So when it comes to modeling fragrances, I'm going to play a bit of a devil's advocate because there's much of worry about how AI and these amazing models are going to affect our lives and our jobs. Is all this modeling meant to just replace perfumers to get people out of their jobs?
We don't think so, and we actually see this a lot internally. We have perfumers here at Osmo. What we have noticed where the models have helped the most right now of our perfumery team is not so much on kind of the full-scale creation of a fragrance. To be honest, perfumers are better than our models in many ways. Where models can help a lot, though, is when I was mentioning earlier about like why it's kind of hard to train to be a perfumer, is because a lot of perfumery is not actually, you don't spend a lot of your time focused on the actual formulation and creation. You're actually spending a lot of time on modifications for performance and stability in application areas. So where models can help a lot is, and we see this with some of our tools, is a perfumer can focus on creation of a new novel odor profile, a new fragrance, and then models can help make sure it works in a paraffin wax base for a candle. It can also help make sure it will work in a laundry care application, or like maybe a fine fragrance, maybe the models will kind of warn the perfumer that this won't be shelf stable because this ingredient's gonna kind of react with ethanol in some way when it's on the shelf exposed to UV. So one of the areas where I think model help a lot is a lot of perfumery time right now is spent on these kind of performance and kind of small modifications, where that's where I think models can help. And the real hope is at the end of the day is like this can actually free up more perfumery time focused on the actual creation of the fragrances. And then leads to also at the same time much faster products to market. So it like a lot of times, especially areas outside fine fragrance, you'll see the actual perfume and the creation of fragrance happens fairly fast. You can kind of come up with like a brand new fragrance for, let's say, hand soap or some type of cosmetic use case, just full perfumer within a week. And it can sometimes take a year of testing to make sure that it's stable and performant. So if you can kind of reduce that time down, you can actually bring lots of new novel fragrances to the market more quickly.
Mm-hmm. Is then the role of a perfumer shifting more toward a kind of conceptual curator?
Conceptual curator, so the creation of the fragrance itself. And I think what perfumers also bring is too is a lot of knowledge about the trends in the market and what's kind of going to work in this product. So work with the brands and kind of the other places to understand, okay, here's what's trending, here's how to create it, here's how to kind of add it to that fragrance. And then now let's launch this together and kind of work together to launch this. And then hopefully for us, the models then take care of like, okay, we will make it sure it works in like the candle application or some other use case that does take up a lot of the perfumer time right now.
Well, that's still a sizable shift because historically, perfumery was considered one of the crafts, and just a lot of craftsmen or authorship, if you wish. And commonly, just like a lot of musicians don't listen to music because they spend so much time creating and doing the whole full production cycle. Similar with perfumers. Perfumers didn't necessarily knew each other's works very well because they were so engrossed into their own world of creation and kind of just going through for it as a job that has a lot of duties. And now, does it push all perfumers to be way more aware of the fragrance market in general and kind of become more marketers?
Depends which type of perfume you are. So a lot of perfumers, especially in the fragrance houses, that is actually part of the job, because what you get is you get like an industry called a brief, kind of request for a new perfume to be made. And usually a lot of those briefs actually contain a lot of market analysis. Like, we want to target this person, we want it to be matching this kind of type of like trend that we've seen on the market. So that's actually a large component of that. And actually, I think a lot of perfumers take pride in that they are able to kind of create there too. I think we get at too is a different type of perfumer, which I think is even more valuable, because models can only really learn of what they've seen. So if you're like a perfumer who is very creative and kind of thinks new things, you're going to be totally outside of whatever the future models hold. Because at least in my opinion, models aren't creative. They're very good at like refinement and kind of helping with kind of like things it's seen before. So for example, making sure you don't use that ingredient in a candle. But kind of full-fledged new kind of like creation of a new fragrance or a fine fragrance or a candle is not going to be, I'm not sure in the future that would come up.
Agree. And there's like great examples more from the world of LLMs, so the generative text, that don't ask ChatGPT to create a new language. It's just, and like they are very eloquent, all remembering many things, remembering parrots rather than actual creators. Well, it's good to know. It brings some hope for those of us who have dreams or appreciate the art of perfumery and the craftsmanship behind it. I'm curious that then to get you, since we're on the roll with machine learning, so there's another huge part of the industry that's changing. What was used to called niche perfumery essentially kind of was coined as a term in the 70s, Serge Lutens, L'Artisan Parfumeur, sort of 70s to the 90s. But now this term, niche perfume houses, there was an analytical report, I think last year, that said that over a third of all releases that are, we have access through databases to, were from niche perfume houses. So nothing can be in niche if it's the largest chunk of the industry. So we're in an exponential explosion of creativity, or at least production, of various perfume entities. And you have hands-on experience with recommendation systems. Can AI help us navigate this overwhelming world of niche perfumery?
Well, I definitely think so too, and it might surface up some of those that like you haven't seen before too. So we do explore this a lot, where we kind of take in our internally a lot of times too, about like a lot of perfumery, and kind of rank and show them too. Very different application, but in the past I worked at Spotify and playlist recommendation too, and in many ways it's similar to perfumery, where if you have people describing the top metal base notes and like longevity and those other characteristics, you can kind of expose that and maybe show in front of someone a fragrance they have never thought about before, or a niche fragrance house that like, oh yeah, like this whole brand I love, and I should be buying this too. So I hope to see more of that in the future, because especially for like the perfumers out there trying new things, I would love to expose them more and allow like these tools to surface up things, and also allow people to try different things, where right now the way at least I have searched through fragrances feels more like little forums, a little Googling, maybe reading a bit of Reddit, and then kind of smelling a few things in the store. But that's kind of a limited window into it. So like if you can kind of show more of this more quickly, and kind of also have ways that people experience those things faster, I think that will change the industry a lot.
Wonder. Again, just to dig a little deeper into recommendation systems. On the ground, this is how it usually, at least used to work. You would find people who like perfumes either online or in person. You'll find someone who seems to like a similar thing that you both know, and then you just peruse the other things that they like. And usually, since it's already gone through their own neural filter, you'll find things that are similar enough, but novel enough. One of the problems that at least classical recommendation systems had, at first they will recommend popular to everyone. It's like the popularity domination. Second, they would over-index on similarity, so you would end up with 10 dupes of the same thing. So how does the fragrance recommendation modeling, you think, can be designed so it's just enough of comfort, similar enough, and yet, well, it's different enough that it's worth adding to my shelf? How would you model that?
Yeah, so if you were thinking about that, so one way is, like you said, you can kind of use like in the ML community, it's called similarity. It's like, okay, these people also bought these things, so you also will like those. That's a very good job, especially with large enough data. A lot of Amazon is based on that. Another approach you can do too is what we do inside is internally we call it the principal order map. So if you can actually know what a fragrance will smell like, you can actually put those fragrances onto a map. And then, for example, you could have people explore the map, and you can also do things with that where I can see like, well, I want to see things close by to this point. There's a fragrance maybe I like a lot. Can you show me things nearby that I may have never heard of before? So what I think this comes down to, and a lot of my career has been around this, is a lot of the ML and AI capabilities are there with recommendation systems, but it's like, what is the UI and a way to explore it? And how do you kind of do this like explore versus kind of exploit, for the matter of like things you've already seen before? It's actually very, very close to my past experience with like trying to recommend music. Music has the same problem too. Like, the actual best way to recommend music, it's actually probably exactly the same for perfumes too. If you want the perfect recommendation for someone that's hard to beat, is just show them the songs they listened to in the past. Because like, when you show them the songs, those are your jams, so you're going to like those ones. So like, if you gave someone like the perfumes they've ordered in the past and kind of put it in the bottle so they couldn't see what it is, they're going to like the ones that they've highly rated in the past, right? If you bought a perfume 6 times, you're going to like that perfume again too, right? It's the same thing with music. So there's this interest in like, how do you return to people something they like, but also you want to keep you out of their comfort zone. Like, you may want to show them a new artist or a new perfume brand. Show them that, but also make sure that like you can take into account when they kind of explore over there, like, okay, now we understand you a bit better. Here's another one that we think you like better. Or maybe here's the one that you purchased 6 months ago, which we know you like because you told us.
I love how we're like slowly getting everyone to use the machine learning terminology. So you guys feel free. If you want to show off your ML knowledge, it's like, oh, it's an explore, exploit type of conundrum, you know? It's like just casual. We're all AI now. What can we do? All right. What are the new frontiers of AI/modeling that excite you right now?
What's really interesting for me now is kind of like with like these big LLMs things too. It's how to use those to mix what these other techniques we're talking about. Like I said, mentioned before, it's like, can you, I'm just curious about like, could we just give it a bunch of information and understand what's trendy right now? Like, you can read a lot of forums and things too, but like, what material, like actually for me in particular, is like, can you use LLMs and these other techniques to understand, oh, there's an ingredient that's trending right now. Like, there's something new in the market and people seem to like it. They might not know they're liking it because it's like not on the label, but there's something about that. Or like very early on understand that like, okay, something like gourmand is trendy or not trendy anymore. I'm not sure where we are on gourmand at this point, but like understanding like, as people talk about things, is there where the trend's going as much as possible. And I'm always kind of interested in that component of it, and how do you leverage some of these ways to just understand like, what are people talking about in a way that can help you say like, oh yeah, it's actually going towards like gourmands, and now it's going towards florals again, or it's like going towards sandalwood or something else this week.
Yeah, that's very fascinating. I'm also looking forward to models becoming more reinforcement learning based, and or at the very least more dynamic, that we don't have this stationary static expectations. Like, we train model on the 2 years of data, and now we have to retrain it and everything, you know, it's just kind of, you go in chunks of predictability, but to have more of a fluid type of models, the models that are stable enough to give good quality predictions, but can also evolve with the influx of new data. to have a little bit more robust setup like this of these systems. All right, next question, and we're getting slowly wrapping up. Thank you so much for your time. What would be the guest that you would love to hear interviewed on Perfume Nation podcast, and what question would you ask if you could? Is there something that you could just like, I just wish I could ask XYZ to explain this?
Yeah. Oh, that's a good question.
Maybe not a person, maybe it's a role. Like, I would love if an experienced neuroscientist, or I would love if a perfumer.
I think the thing I would love to hear about is like actually kind of those niche brands. Like, what goes in from 0 to 1? Like, how do you even think about developing a new fragrance brand? How do you conceptualize it and like think about, okay, it's gonna be targeted at like, clean or kind of fun, or like the whole, like, I'm always fascinated because not my background at all is like the ideation of like the fragrance and the perfumer, and kind of thinking about like, okay, how do we put the brand and the bottle and then the whole message behind that, and how do we get it out into the world and people know about it and kind of launch that. That whole process I find fascinating because it's an interesting mixture of like business and entrepreneurship and kind of like artistry and creation, and kind of like and just like sales too, because you have to actually sell the ingredient too. So those mixture of things I find really interesting.
Agree. And there's also so much psychological discovery in the multisensory design, because there are so many cases when a perfume gives, like, the smell, the juice itself gives you one impression. The bottle design gives you a different impression. The marketing of how they describe it or how they design the visuals gives you a third impression. And unfortunately, each of them could be really compelling, but if they don't form this magical, cohesive, non-linear thing that's somehow congruent, all congruent with each other, the perfume is not going to perform well.
Exactly. And some people can do this repeatedly and other people can't. It's a fact. So it's a skill, but yeah, for me it's kind of magic. But that is a pretty interesting set of skills that some people have to put together.
All right, I'll try to bring us someone who can kind of unveil a little bit of a mystery behind this concept, because it's infinitely interesting. And obviously a lot of people are becoming way more interested in branding in just general the world of design now that perfumery is becoming more and more accessible, thanks to you guys as well. So where can we learn more about your work and kind of stay in touch with Osmo?
Yeah, so you go to osmo.ai is a website, so you can read more about us and kind of read about some of actually the captive ingredients that we've launched over the past year. Also, if you want to ever go much deeper into like the science I was talking about earlier, the team that formed Osmo was originally from Google Brain. So we have a bunch of papers published, research papers, so you can actually just read how our models work, how we collected the data, and the performance of it too. So if you ever want to go and explore that, you can go there on our website and you can kind of read about those. But also, we just love to stay in touch. And if you have questions for us, feel free to reach out to us.
All right. I will collect all the questions for Rich, and if you have anything you want to ask him, please leave a comment below. I will collect them all, and Rich has generously offered to provide a follow-up answers, and if there is an interest for more interviews with Osmo, please let us know. Rich, thank you so much for coming.
Thank you. It's been great.